Welcome to Solo Ship Week 14. I'm Squirrel Patrol. I'm joined by James to win from 1 week season. James, I actually don't really remember anything from last week other than Tyreek Hill and Zach Moss, and that my hot take was Bryce Young, and that did not pan out.
I played some. One of the things I love about doing a show like this with somebody like you is, and we talked about this before, like you'll say one or two things that sticks in my mind. It used to be the same way when I had that show with Hefe. Like I'll pick up one or two things that stick in my mind, and sometimes I don't end up pulling the trigger on them, but it like gives me one extra thing to think about. But yeah, I did like think about that Bryce Young thing, and I did like 2 or 3% Bryce Young rosters last week. So I was like, you know what, this is actually really sharp. Didn't end up working out, but I do think it was sharp. No, last week was the week to play high-priced running backs and get Deebo Samuel and Brock Purdy, and that was about it. I had like half the puzzle right. I kept talking about all the reasons to fade Zach Moss or like be underweight Zach Moss and all the ways he could fail. I had like 40% Brock Purdy last week, mixed and matched the 49ers across all my rosters, 100% Tyreek Hill, but I went like all cheap running backs. Like Ramondre got hurt and Devin Singletary didn't keep the lead job and Javonte Williams did nothing. So yeah, it didn't end up mattering that I was sharp on like 60% of things, but we turned the page onto this week.
Yeah, onto week 14, and the only thing that can stop us from getting more Zach Moss, I think, is actually the breaking news with the Kansas City running backs. So Isaiah Pacheco is out, and I was actually talking this over with Blender this morning when it didn't seem all that likely that Pacheco would necessarily miss the game, and I thought this could make a major impact on the slate because that game has the highest total, and I think it's a game that people would want to stack, but it's too expensive to stack. But if Pacheco is out, and now he is out, then you have affordable running backs, although which one is a good question. And now you can afford more pieces from that game. I think it's going to lead to a lot more people landing on the Kansas City and Buffalo game.
I hope you're wrong. I really like my hot take is Josh Allen specific. So he's like currently sub 3% projected owned, but yeah, hopefully it just leads to people kind of going with the running back and not actually getting onto the game environment. But that's a good call that it does free up the salary to make it a little more flexible to be able to go to those quarterbacks. I'm hoping that people still lean the Patrick Mahomes route, but yeah, I think it's a slate where there's not a lot of super interesting games or like when you say what games could massively separate, there aren't a lot of games that could massively separate. So if the slate plays out in a way that one of the games massively separates, this is one of the ones that could. And so because of that, like that always stands out to me.
Do you ever read, I know this just broke about an hour before we started recording, on whether like Clyde Edwards-Helaire or Jerick McKinnon or a split between the two, like projections I have not updated on a lot of sites, for this news, but there was like some early prop lines came out that Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I think about 50 yards rushing, and both McKinnon and Clyde Edwards-Helaire at about 2.5 receptions and 15 or 17 receiving yards. That would put them both in play, I think. If and if you give them about a 50-50 shot at a touchdown in a high-scoring game, the Kansas City running back, McKinnon probably a little bit less. That puts both of them in play as like a pretty good value running back. Do you have a read between the two?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff here. I think 50% chance of a touchdown is probably pretty high, right? Because Pacheco's got 3 over the last 2 weeks. But before that, it was like 4 all season because they just don't run the ball in the red zone. So I think that's pretty critical to think about, is that one of the things is that it does compel, I'll say it like this, Kansas City has adjusted their offense to their personnel. That's what good teams do. And so they've developed this downhill running component to their game, not because it's like, oh, we want to do this. And so we'll fit any peg into this hole. It's just like, man, Isaiah Pacheco is this physical downhill runner. So now let's build that in. So I do think this leads to more passing. I think that this leads to more short area passing because they can't really get stuff going downfield. And so I think that McKinnon steps in for a larger share of that role. I would think 2.5 catches would seem pretty low. But also, I mean, they talk up Clyde Edwards-Helaire internally all the time, like as if they still really like him. So I do think that we see him take on the lead role. I just don't think that it's as robust as Pacheco's lead role. So kind of like, yeah, I mean, anywhere from 13 to 16 carries wouldn't surprise me. A couple catches at his price tag, really interesting. Could obviously put up like an 8-point game as well at his price tag. So I don't think he's a smash play, but he's definitely steps into the mix.
It's interesting. You said they still talk about him internally as though they really like him. They haven't been playing him in their DFS lineups the past year or so. like both these guys are pretty cheap. You know, at 4,200, I think for Clyde Edwards-Helaire on DraftKings, 4,800 from McKinnon. I was surprised they both had like 2.5 receptions as a receiving. I think of McKinnon as being the receiving back, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire as being like the bruising running back that gets called in at the goal line. I'm interested. I'm kind of toying around, just as the news breaks, with the idea of like playing both of them in a lineup for 9,000, and then just rotating that, taking that money and then spending up elsewhere in my lineup. But I do also think there's the possibility that Mahomes just ends up throwing the ball more, and maybe it's just more of a Patrick Mahomes game, and you don't need the running backs. But it's hard to parse it out, with the news just breaking.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to look this up, but Clyde Edwards-Helaire has I think one game in his career over 22 DraftKings points. Like, it's not like he's going to come out and just post this monster game. You know what I mean? Like, he's probably going to put up, really good game, 14 to 16 DraftKings points. But yeah, I mean, he definitely steps into the mix with all of this.
So I wanted to get to hot takes a little bit early. You said you've got one ready, or?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Josh Allen is going to outscore every other quarterback on this slate by at least 13 DraftKings points.
Ooh, okay. So that's an interesting one. It ties into mine a little bit. I have a non-player specific hot take. I think there's going to be more touchdowns scored in the 4 p.m. games than in the 7 1 p.m. games. Something when I looked at the schedule, I couldn't believe there's so many bad games in that 1 p.m. window. And then all the players that I want, not all the players, but I'd say like 85% of the players that I am interested in this week come in those 4 p.m. games. And I think it sets up an interesting like late swap possibility where you're maybe just playing Zach Moss in about 50% of your rosters or less, probably a little bit less. And you just see how Zach Moss does. And you just ignore everything from the 1 p.m. games. And then you're playing either like a standard Patrick Mahomes stack, or maybe you're switching to like Joshua Dobbs and Justin Jefferson, right? Like you're taking like equal amounts of salary and just allocating it depending on how your roster is doing so far. I don't usually do that kind of thing with NFL. Sometimes in NBA, I'll actually skip like the first game. If it's an island game and it's projected to have a pretty low total, I'll skip like the first NBA game of the night to wait for more news. This one's really interesting on football because I know some people are like late swap aficionados, and especially if they're playing a lot of head-to-heads or high dollar or smaller field contests, they'll really see how their lineup is doing and then switch some pretty off the board stuff if they're behind. This week, it seems like you could do that in mass, whether you're doing single entry or doing 150 lineups or 20 lineups, or 6 like single entry lineups. Like you could really just see, because you'll probably have like minimal stuff from the 1 p.m. games, like see how that stuff does and then just adjust accordingly.
Yeah, I don't think the field is going to have minimal stuff from the 1 p.m. games because they're all over like, Indianapolis wide receivers and Drake London and I don't know, whatever else everybody wants to be on from those early games. But no, I mean, I really like the Detroit Chicago game is like kind of like we said it the last 2 weeks. We said like the Philadelphia San Francisco game, the Philadelphia Buffalo game, like bet the over in terms of how you're building your DFS rosters because they can go way over. That game, that over under doesn't tell the story of, and it started at 46. And then I think there was weather concerns, like wind concerns. It went all the way down to 40. Now it's back up to 43, was up to 44, I think yesterday. So, but yeah, I mean, I think that game has like really interesting shootout potential. And then, yeah, I mean, I'm with you. You could definitely just outside of that, wait for the late games. And I think that one of the things that I think is important to think about is like, you see 3 game slates where like, the top score in the tournament is 230 points. You know what I mean? Like you can build 200 plus point rosters from just 3 games. Like if those are the game environments to go off. So, I mean, I think that sometimes people spread themselves out too far and don't really recognize that you can limit the number of games that you're on in that way. So yeah, no, I like that take a lot. I looked at Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So in his rookie year, he had a 23.9 pointer, ironically against Buffalo, but 23.9 pointer, but 30 touches. So this is his rookie year. They drafted him in the first round. And then his first game of his career, 22.8 points on 25 carries. Outside of that, he has several like 20.4 point games. And those are the best games of his career, 20.4 points, done it like 3 different times. So yeah, I mean, keep that in mind. Oh, a 20.9 pointer, or a 22.4 pointer. But yeah, keep that in mind. I think as you go through this is, so I had that wrong. It's like 3 different 22.4 pointers are the best games of his career. And typically he's going to be in this 12 to 15 point range. So, I mean, I don't think he's some smash play that you just like automatically flock to the way that the field probably will. I'm sure underweight Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but still have my fair share of Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
Yeah, I think I'll end up with a good amount of him, probably less than I have of Zach Moss.
Yeah,
but
absolutely for me.
I think he's going to project well. Like just looking at the props and looking at just initial projections and the fact that he's like 600 cheaper than Jarek McKinnon. McKinnon has not done much this year. Of course, that obviously came with Isaiah Pacheco. I think people are going to look at this as Jarek McKinnon is still going to do nothing, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire is just going to get the Isaiah Pacheco stats at 4,200. And I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to end up with really high ownership. Yeah, and I think McKinnon might be more of a really off the board pivot. I mean, I think he'll get some ownership, but I think it'll be more among people like trying to galaxy brain it. So I mean, I think if you like McKinnon more, and I kind of do, I think like you want McKinnon more in a game that's going to be high scoring, which is like, so if you're stacking this game, like you definitely, not definitely, you probably want more McKinnon than Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I don't think that's the way the field is going to play it. Speaking of the field, of the 1 p.m. games, I think one of the people I'm really interested in is Justin Fields. I think there's a possibility that maybe my rosters from the 1 p.m. games are Justin Fields, like Lamar Jackson and Zach Moss, spread out amongst 150 rosters to some extent. And then, pivoting for the 1 p.m. or for the 4 p.m. slots based on how those 3 guys do in the 1 p.m. games. What do you think about just the quarterback position in general? Like, are you high on Justin Fields, Lamar Jackson? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I always play Lamar Jackson at like a dramatically lower rate than the field, which means that I miss out on, when he had like the 2 big games last year. He's had 1 monster game this year, like 2 really solid games for his price tag. So that's 5 games in the last 2 years that I kind of missed out on, right? But then I also miss out on all of his 12 to 19 point games, which is his typical game. So I won't be on him, but I mean, I never like talk him down. I just don't have a good feel for when Lamar Jackson's going to hit. Yeah, to me, it's like Justin Fields, Josh Allen, these takeover types of games. I'll won't waste all the time talking about it here, but like what makes the Chiefs defense so good isn't like something that's going to give Josh Allen as many problems as the typical quarterback. You know what I mean? And so, he has a greater potential to break through in this matchup than most quarterbacks, and people aren't likely to treat it that way. They're likely to, currently like sub 3%, right? So even if he gets up to 4%, 5%, just the fact that like he could easily put up like a 19-point game, but just the fact that he can go for 35 to 40. And even Fields, right? He put up 30 twice this year, but with his arm against Denver and Washington, bad Denver, like before they got things figured out, and the Washington pass defense. And then he has like the 2 40-pointers from last year. Everything else from him is like 24 points and below, right? So just to kind of highlight, we can have a week where Purdy's scoring 22 at high ownership and Fields is scoring 24 and Lamar Jackson scoring 19. And then like Josh Allen comes out with 39. So to me, my quarterback pool is really like Justin Fields and Josh Allen. And like, I might not have much beyond, like I'm going to maybe save 10, 15% of my roster, just kind of mix and match some other pieces. But like, yeah, these 2 guys to me are what this slate points to in terms of what could win you a tournament.
It's interesting, like Lamar Jackson versus Justin Fields. On FanDuel, the price difference is just $100, right? So like 8,000 for Lamar, 7,900 for Justin Fields, and like at equal price, I probably like Lamar a little bit, but I'd probably end up like a higher percentage of Fields. On DraftKings, Lamar is 900 more, 7,700 versus 6,800. But I think Fields is going to end up with a lot of ownership. Not necessarily that that's a bad thing, right? Like sometimes the field does go to the right player, but there's also like a big gap between Justin Fields and Justin Herbert, who's the next most expensive guy. There's like a $700 price difference, and that can really draw ownership to the guy that's cheaper. And there's like that.
Yeah.
I actually don't mind Justin Herbert either, which is interesting. I think he's going to see like much less ownership than even like as is projected. But I think he's more of a guy that I would pivot to, like, if I do that 1 p.m., 4 p.m. kind of pivot thing, I think he's going to come in with pretty low ownership. and this could be the week the Chargers put it together. Like they're just probably not as bad as they've looked recently. So I think Keenan Allen is always a natural stacking partner for Justin Herbert. So that might be a direction that I go in.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, another thing I like about Fields is just like, who do you stack him with? It's so straightforward that, one of the values of getting your quarterback right is that you can get 2 spots right. You know what I mean? And I like when you get Sam Howell right, which I've done 5 times this year, but like how many times have I gotten that second spot right with him, or if Russell Wilson goes for 25 points, and everybody who rosters Russ gets those points, like how many of them actually get like a second score with that? Whereas with Fields, like DJ Moore, 5 of his last 6 games with Fields have been 19 plus DraftKings points, so it's like they don't throw to Darnell Mooney. They don't throw to Equanimeous St. Brown. It's like Cole Kmet gets some targets and then it's all DJ Moore. So I like that component with Fields as well. It's like if you get Fields right, you're getting DJ Moore, maybe not to like a tournament winning score, but like you're getting on a week where there might not be a lot of really solid scores. You might hit a lot of landmines. You're getting like a solid score to potentially a tournament winning score. So I like that about Fields as well.
It's interesting. The spreadsheet I have open like right next to this window is DJ Moore's stats like the last 8 weeks because I wanted to average up like his stats with Justin Fields versus the Tyson Bagent for a blurb I was writing, right? Or I guess it was for my article. It was DJ Moore statistics with Justin Fields. I can get like a bad game the first week, and then I think reasonable game the second week. And then after that, it's just been like bananas.
Yeah, I mean, 13. His only bad game was against the Kansas City pass defense. So it's like 19.4, 30.1, 52.0, 22.6, 25.4. So I mean, somehow he's not like projecting for super high ownership, which is sort of weird. You see, like Russ is currently plus 10%, 10% plus, and like Judy and Sutton are both like around 6%. So you're like, how are you playing Russ? What's your approach? But like I feel like we're not going to see a lot of more one-offs and even some Fields without more. And so I think he's a nice little edge this week.
Yeah, and my other Justin Fields stat, I think other people have referenced this, but I saw that he's put up 100 yards rushing in each of his last 3 games against Detroit.
Yeah.
And also added a passing touchdown in each of those games. In Detroit, the last 2 years, gives up the most rushing yards to quarterbacks, but it's actually just because of Justin Fields. If you take out the Justin Fields games, like they don't give up. I actually don't know if there's still a high number, but it's not the highest. Right? It's just that Fields has gone for like 130 yards against them. So that adds to like their 30 or so average rushing yards they give up to quarterbacks. But 130 of it, or last year, 200 something of it came from Justin Fields, and that elevated the Lions to be this like defense that.
Yeah, I mean, Lamar had 9 for 36 against them. Obviously, like they were dominating that game, so he didn't have to run a bunch. But it's not like they're just like automatically just giving up huge yards. But Fields has definitely done great on the ground against that defense.
Yeah. So other places to go, I guess, like in general, is like, what do you think about the 1 p.m. games? Is like other than Justin Fields, is there anything you like from that? There's one spot that I think sticks out to me. I'm interested in other than Lamar Jackson and Justin Fields. One spot that sticks out to me. Anything in particular you think you'll be going to?
Yeah, I mean, I think Indy and Cincy are really interesting. Was that the one you were going to say?
Yeah, exactly. That's the exact one I was going to say.
Yeah, I mean, Indy's so pace up. So this is their last 5 games that were not against New England and Carolina. Okay, the game totals for them: 58, 47, 65, 77, 57. And then the last 4 Bengals games, they had a 26-pointer against Pittsburgh. So work around that, and you've got 65, 54, and 57. So Bengals defense has been really bad this year. Colts defense they give up big plays because they're trying to make big plays on defense. And Brown, I was really bummed that Browning had that big game on Monday Night Football, because I said it like when he first took over, like just his fit in Zach Taylor's offense and the way Zach Taylor runs his offense, like he was going to be capable of having some big games, just feeding the ball to Jamar Chase and getting things done that way. So a little bit bummed that his ownership's going to go up, but I also don't think it's just chasing points to go to him. And that's definitely a game that, it has that type of potential. You look at me, you're like, oh, this actually combined for 60 plus points, like that's a legit shootout. And these guys are all kind of underpriced for that.
Yeah, it was the exact game that I was going to say. Just because like the Jake Browning game came out after pricing. So you can't go back and adjust his pricing. So he's really too cheap than he should be. And that means something, right? Like getting a confident quarterback at cheaper than he should be priced. Like that allows you to get combinations of players, of higher priced players you can't get otherwise. And if I'm going to be playing a good amount of Zach Moss anyway, like I might as well pair that and make it a full stack, and that gets that lineup a little bit different. And I think that's like a very valid single entry, strategy. It's just a lot of people are probably going to be playing Zach Moss, like add Jamar Chase and Jake Browning, and suddenly you have a game stack. And part of the reason that Zach Moss is projecting somewhat well is because that game has a little bit of a higher total. And I think it is a game that could go over that total. And like Jamar Chase can kind of succeed even if Browning is not having a great game. Because he can just absorb so much of the targets and so much of the receiving yards. And at Jake Browning's price, he doesn't need a tremendous game. Like he doesn't kill you with just an average or a good game for him. So yeah, that's one game that I'm interested in stacking.
Yeah, as you were saying that too, I mean, it made me think Jamar Chase is 7,600, right? And Michael Pittman's 7,100 or 7,300. And like Michael Pittman's going to have 5x the ownership of Jamar Chase. And like the thinking is like, oh, Jamar Chase has Jake Browning throwing the ball. Like Michael Pittman has Gardner Minshew throwing him the ball. I mean, both of them just need a lot of targets to pile up. I do think that people are going to underestimate like the chances of Jamar Chase having a big game here, because you get 16 targets, then you can hit, right? And he can hit it. I mean, he can do it on 2 catches because he can catch a short pass and break off a big game, whereas Pittman kind of just needs those 16 targets to pile up. So no, I mean, I think I really like that angle. And I hadn't even thought about that like pricing component of just how closely those two are priced and how broad the gap is in ceiling between those two.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if Jamar Chase is going to be that low owned, but if he is, I think that's great. Because I've seen a lot of people say that they're looking forward to playing Jamar Chase. I think he's going to come in higher owned. Like I bet Chase comes in at equal to the ownership of Pittman or higher. Because also like Browning,
I'd be shocked if he's equal to the ownership of Pittman.
Well, because Browning is priced too low, especially on DraftKings. And people are going to just put a setting like to stack their quarterback with one wide receiver and then just crank out a lineup. And some of those lineups are just going to be Browning and Jamar Chase. And then, they're going to see, oh, Zach Moss is in there too. And they're going to go, okay, this works. And I think it does work. I just think other people are going to see that. And if they don't,
I got you. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, another guy priced in this range, Chris Olave with Jameis stepping in. I think not a good matchup, but one of the things we've talked about with Carolina is they have decent talent on defense on the back end, but the reason they're good is like they have good communication, good discipline, good structure. But like we see really good wide receivers break. Justin Jefferson had 95 yards and 2 touchdowns. Tyreek Hill had a big game against them. Mike Evans had the big game against them. So Chris Olave, I think, is another one where with Jameis slinging the ball to him, he could break off some big plays. There's some interesting pieces in this price range, and even up to Justin Jefferson, who I think people will be a little bit scared to play because of the unknowns of Josh Dobbs. And so I think that there's, we've talked about this year that Christian McCaffrey, he's so safe, but like this isn't Christian McCaffrey on the Panthers where he was their only weapon and he saw 10 to 14 targets a game. He averages like 5 to 5.5 targets a game, right? And like 17 carries. So like he's got to score the touchdowns. Typically he's scoring 22 to 24 points. And so, I mean, I like McCaffrey a lot this week, but kind of like, couldn't McCaffrey score 22 to 24 and Jefferson scores 35 or Chase scores 35 or one of these guys scores like a high score that kind of separates from the Christian McCaffrey roster. So I think that's an interesting angle to play this week too, from a strategy perspective.
I'm going to end up under the field on Christian McCaffrey, and it's I put that as the thing that's going to scare me the most this week on the RotoGrinders expert survey, just because like he's just hits every week, but that's got to stop at some point. I just wish he was a little bit more expensive. Like he should be for his past performance a little bit higher priced, and he is on FanDuel, but not on DraftKings. And so I think I'll end up, especially under the field, on FanDuel most likely. But I do like the idea of taking that salary and allocating it elsewhere. I've been a big Joshua Dobbs fan this year, just because I like the idea that he switched teams twice and it just keeps winning, right? I get like 5 games in a row with a rushing touchdown and a passing touchdown. Like that's a really hard thing to do for any quarterback, and he did it across 2 different teams. And Arizona, traded him. I guess Cleveland traded him, and he just seems to succeed wherever he goes. Like Minnesota is still alive for the playoffs. And it occurred to me, like, what if Justin Jefferson's actually better with Joshua Dobbs, right? Like, what if Dobbs locks in on Justin Jefferson? Like, it doesn't even have to be a winning NFL thing; it can just be a winning fantasy thing. I think Justin Jefferson's going to go not overlooked, but I think he'll be underplayed. And he's one of those guys that I like the idea of switching. If my 1 p.m. lineup, isn't looking so good, take some of the money that I would maybe have allocated to the Chiefs Bills game, and I'm switching instead to like Joshua Dobbs and Justin Jefferson. Just because like that, like we have no idea what to expect there, but like Justin Jefferson can put up huge scores.
It is one of those things where you end up seeing like he projects for like 5% owned, and he is 5% owned at the start at kickoff at 1 p.m. games, and then like all the people who are like, I'll pivot to Justin Jefferson because he's low, and like he ends up doubling his ownership through that. But I could see that happening. But no, I like that a lot. Like there's interesting options on this late slate that you can pivot to potentially separate from the field, and he's definitely one of them for sure.
Yeah, and actually just a little bit lower in the price range, Davante Adams is somebody that can be locked in on as well.
The one who people aren't actually going to pivot to is Davante Adams. Like he'll still stay low owned, even with people pivoting in the late games.
Yeah, so you have like a game stack right there. I mean, that would be a difficult one with the salary, but yeah, you have to take the salary from presumably Christian McCaffrey. Maybe Christian McCaffrey and Keenan Allen are becoming, and some quarterback are becoming, Davante Adams, Justin Jefferson, and Joshua Dobbs. And you're just hoping that game goes over. Like those are 2 wide receivers. Like if you had said at the beginning of the year that those are going to be the 2 highest priced wide receivers in week 14, you wouldn't have blinked. But now they're kind of, I guess Jefferson's still pretty expensive. But Davante Adams is pretty far down there, or at least down there in the price rankings. I guess like that'll just about wrap up. Any final thoughts on the week?
I was talking about all this late swap stuff. My wife's running a half marathon on Sunday morning, so I'm actually like in my head, I'm like, what is the schedule like on Sunday? Because like she wants the kids there at the finish line, and that'll be like 2 hours before late games kick off. But we'll all go out to like dinner or like brunch afterwards. So I'll have to figure out what my late swap strategy is like in advance so that I can kind of piece those things together on the fly. But I mean, it's an interesting week. It's kind of similar to last week. I don't think there's going to be a lot of like a plethora of 25 to 30 point DraftKings scores. So, you really got to look for those game environments or those players that can separate, because you find those, you're so far ahead of the field in some of these spots this week.
Yeah, I think it is. It's an interesting week. It was a week that I first looked at and had a hard time finding anything I liked. And I thought maybe I'm going to end up game stacking, a little bit less. But I do think the Kansas City running back situation does give us some interesting options, and it makes game stacking a lot easier, particularly if you are going to late swap a lot. Like you can start with a game stack of the Chiefs Bills game now that you maybe couldn't afford earlier. And then you can just pivot to one of the other games. You can pivot to San Francisco and add some Seattle pieces that maybe a lot of people won't have, or you can switch to Minnesota and the Raiders game, and end up with a lineup that's maybe different from other people, but also depending on how your 1 p.m. pieces turn out, you're either aiming for a tournament winning score or just aiming for a min cash. That'll just about wrap it up for week 14 of Soloship. Good luck to everybody, and we'll see you guys next week.